I own 3 pieces of real estate, 2 of which I rent out on Airbnb. The third property is my house in Montreal where I live. Where this story took place was my rental property in Wakefield, Quebec. It's a comfy small home in the woods that's advertised as such. It's a 2-bedroom, but since it's a small house, it's geared more towards couples. Sometimes I'll have groups of 4 or more staying there. Those are the groups I usually worry about because they're the ones who could do damage. With the couples, they usually clean up pretty well after themselves, and I trust a cleaning lady to go take care of the place afterwards. After a bigger group stay, I usually take the drive over there myself to clean and make sure nothing was damaged or stolen. It's only about 2 hours, and when I do decide to take the drive there, I'll most often stay the night there anyway. This was after a bigger group stayed for a weekend, so I wanted to go up there and just clean and check on the place. I let my nearest neighbor know I was heading up there for the day. Like me, he's also hardly ever there, so when I do go up there, I reach out to him to see if there's anything he wants me to bring around back, like his mail or packages. He texted back pretty quickly that he won't be up there this week, and he'd appreciate it if I could check if there's mail from a specific person. So on my way to his house, I pulled up his driveway to his mailbox. As I walked over to it, I saw footprints in the snow alongside the house. Before investigating that, I checked his mailbox, and there were just a few junky-looking envelopes, like credit card offers. I told him there's no mail from the person he mentioned, and then I let him know that someone had walked on his property. It wasn't the mailman because the footsteps came from the woods, approached the window, and then walked around to the back. He called me, and he told me to check where the footprints led to. I followed them all around the house, and then they led off into the woods on the other side of the house. He said as long as they didn't break in, I don't give a shit. So I left and drove the remaining minute up the hill to my house. The second I got out of the car, I noticed a bunch of footprints in the snow around the property. The guests left a couple days ago, and it had snowed there the day before I arrived, so it was a little interesting that their footprints didn't fill in yet. There was more snow coming tonight, so they'd surely be filled by tomorrow. The first thing I did was change the security lock on the front door for the next visitors. Walking into the house, it was kind of a mess. They left the sink full of dishes and glasses, the garbage bin was full, and cans of pop and beer were everywhere. Some guests are like this because they figure, hey, we're paying a cleaning fee anyway. I triple-checked everything to make sure nothing was taken or missing, and then I began cleaning. I had music playing as I cleaned, but even over the music, I heard something from outside. My house is all the way up on a hill surrounded by woods. No one should ever be here. I turned off the radio, and I heard footsteps in the snow right outside the house. They just passed a window, now going to the backyard. I went to make sure I locked the front door, and then I didn't make any noise. Whoever was out there had to know I was here because my car was out front. After like 20 minutes of sitting in the living room, I decided to get up and go outside to look around. Sure enough, there was a fresh trail of footprints circling the house. I followed them all around the house, and then they seemed to just stop or overlap in the back of the house by the window air conditioning unit. I looked out to the woods, feeling like someone was just out there watching. So I went back inside and didn't go outside again that day. I ordered a lot of food on Grubhub that took forever to be delivered, which ended up being my late lunch and dinner. How I spent the rest of my day after cleaning and doing the laundry was just working remotely on my laptop. It was snowing again outside, and it was supposed to snow all night, meaning I'd definitely have some people looking to rent the next few days for the cozy factor. That's usually how it goes. After I was done with work and it was like 8 o'clock, I started watching a movie, and during the movie, I was hearing these creaks and cracks in the ceiling that I'd never heard before. There's no attic, so it was weird. My only idea was that it could be the weight of the fresh snow on the roof. After the movie, I went to bed. I could hear the sound of the snowflakes hitting the windowsill outside. It was so peaceful. But that unsettling sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. The realization that someone was outside this late at night was horrific. The footsteps passed my window, then faded away. I was sitting on the edge of my bed for like 20 minutes, waiting for any kind of sound, like one of the doors being shimmied with or something. Anything that would shift me from awareness mode to full-on defense mode. It was a long while of silence before I went outside in my coat and shoes with a baseball bat, and I walked around the house. There was once again another fresh trail of footprints, but this time they started at the air conditioning unit, and they walked away towards the woods. I then put it together that someone was likely on my roof before, and they climbed up and down via the window AC unit. I went back inside and decided to call the police. A Wakefield police officer came to the house maybe 20 minutes later. We looked outside together. He even climbed up onto the roof and told me there were indeed footprints and such on the roof that would suggest that someone had been up there. He was very nice and reassuring, telling me he wouldn't be far away if I heard them come back. I also told him about the similar footprints at my neighbor's house, just as a warning in case this person or group of people is targeting multiple houses for whatever they're doing. As he left, he said he'd be in the area. The next morning I left, and I rented the place out to a group of guests a few days later. They didn't report anything out of the ordinary. Thankfully, this was only an isolated incident that happened over a year ago. This is something that happened when I was, of course, home alone when I was a kid. I was in the 7th grade. My parents just recently started leaving me home alone. I would just play video games when they would be away. One night my parents were out doing whatever and I was alone, playing video games. We had the video games in the basement so that my older brother and I could share it, and our dad didn't want the video games in the living room. The basement at my parents' house is pretty big, but also as little kids it scared the crap out of my brother and I, where when it was time to go upstairs, we'd flick the light and spring up the stairs as if demons were chasing us. At 12, I obviously wasn't as scared as I was as a little kid, but I would still look over my shoulder every once in a while when I was down there alone, especially if I was home alone. I was playing whatever video game I played at the time, when bang, there was this crash at the basement window. I damn near jumped out of my seat as I turned around to look at the window. It sounded like someone hit their fist on the window. It was kind of dark out since it was cloudy and snowing outside. I looked at the window and noticed there were some snow particles on the window. It looked like a piece of snow might have hit it. My initial thoughts was that it was a falling icicle hitting the window. I tried to go back to playing video games, but the icicle theory melted when there was another loud bang on the glass. I stood up this time and looked closer at the window. There were even more particles of snow in the glass now. Someone was out there throwing snowballs at the window. I knew it had to be my brother Keith. I went upstairs into the backyard door. I opened the interior door and looked out through the glass exterior door. The brick wall to the left blocked view of the entire backyard, so I opened the door and stepped into the yard, with only a pair of slides on my feet. The cold snow and air was blowing in my face as I stepped down the 2 steps to the ground level and looked beyond the brick wall. I called Keith's name and said, "Why didn't you tell me you're coming home tonight?" I saw someone in the bushes in front of the back fence. They were clearly hiding. I said, "Keith, I see you." But the more I looked, the more scared I got, questioning if that was actually Keith. I went back inside and locked the door. I went straight to the phone and called my mom to ask her if Keith is supposed to be home. She told me no, he's at his friend's house for the night. Right at that moment, another snowball. I asked my mom if she heard that, and she said yes. I told her there's someone in the backyard throwing snowballs at the windows. She now put me on speaker so my dad could talk too. My dad asks if it's some kids messing around, and I said I don't know. I was just a kid, and I was freaking out. I asked, "When are you guys going to be home?" And they said soon, they're already on their way home. I remembered my mom telling me to not let them know I'm home, but I said they already know because I went outside into the yard. So she told me to just wait upstairs in my room with the door locked, and she was going to call the police for me. And that's what I did. I went to my room and kept the lights off. It was getting darker out, but when I looked out my window, I could still see. There was someone walking around the backyard. They were looking through the downstairs windows, and then I saw them knocking on the kitchen window, the one they threw the snowball at minutes ago. They thought I was still in there because the light was left on. Whoever it was, they weren't a kid. They looked too tall. Maybe they were an older teenager or something, but I couldn't tell because they had a jacket or a coat on with the hood up. I kept watching, and I saw they tried lifting open the window downstairs. Obviously, in the dead of winter, those windows hadn't been unlocked for months. But one thing was for sure, they were trying to get into the house. He then started looking up at the upstairs windows, and that's when I ducked down. I didn't look out the window again. There was a crash at my bedroom window now. He must have seen me. He threw a few snowballs at the windows in my room, and then it just stopped. My mom called me back to make sure I'm okay and tell me that the police are on their way. It took a long time, probably because of the conditions, but the doorbell eventually rang, and so I went down to confirm it was the police before letting the police officer in. It was a lone female cop, probably in her 40s. She walked around the property with her flashlight as I stayed inside and watched through the windows. She checked the bushes, the shed, and the patio. When she came back front, she said there were footprints all over the yard, but that there's definitely no one out there. Not anymore, at least. She spoke to my mom on the phone for a few minutes, and then she told me that she's gonna wait here until my parents got home. At the end of the day, my parents showed up, the cop left, and I was okay. It may have just been some weirdo or some teenagers playing some messed up prank, though the guy trying to open the window makes me think otherwise. If it were an attempted break-in, it was clearly the dumbest attempt ever after alerting me with the snowballs. I think it was someone that was just trying to scare me, just to be a twisted individual. Many years ago, I went with my girlfriend Trish, my friend John, and his girlfriend Katie to the Colorado Rockies in the dead of winter. John is a longtime friend of mine who I love to do outdoor activities with, like hiking, snowboarding, and mountaineering. John's family owns a cabin there, so we stayed there for a couple nights. We picked a weekend with snow in the forecast. When we arrived to the cabin, there was already snow on the ground, but there was more snow in the forecast for the next day. The first night we got there, we all unwinded by jumping in the hot tub and having wine. The cabin is very remote in the middle of the woods. There were small snow flurries falling from the sky that night while we were in the hot tub. It was a sign of what was to come tomorrow. The next day, we all woke up to see it lightly snowing outside, lighter than the forecast had let on. Not much new snow had accumulated on the ground yet, but we still held out hope that it would continue to snow throughout the day. John fueled up the quad his family had in the big shed out back. We had to jump it with my car initially, but when it was up and running, we took turns riding it around the trails on his property. This went on for hours, as his property is massive. It has big openings perfect for drifting and doing donuts, and then it has tight, winding trails to ride through. Throughout this foggy day, it was snowing, but earlier in the day, it was a light snowfall. John rode around with Katie for a while Trish and I were outside sledding down this big hill on the property. After a while of this, we all went out for lunch. I took my pickup truck there, so getting around in the snow wasn't an issue. By the time we got back, the girls were ready for a nap. John and I said screw that, and we put on our hiking gear and went into the woods, climbing one of the trails we had been riding around on the quad. This trail went way up the mountain though, past John's property, so we began to climb. Both of us are really fit, so we're used to this kind of thing, but for the average person, hiking an uphill in the snow with heavy boots on can get very tiring. We hiked for about half an hour to an hour up the mountain before we made it near to the top. Or at the very least, we stopped at a spot that would have been an amazing view if it weren't so foggy and snowy. All we could see was white. We took a break up here though and sat in the snow. The snow was starting to come down a lot harder now. The forecast was right. I asked John for like the third time, "Are you sure you know how to get back?" And he said yes, absolutely. So he led the way back down the mountain. It was a full-on blizzard at this point, so we picked up the pace. Luckily, going down is a lot easier than going up. At some point as we were descending, I heard this moaning, humming type sound coming from behind us out of nowhere. I told John to stop and asked if he heard that. He said no. We stood still and waited. Then it happened again. There was this rumbling, moaning type sound coming from not far behind us. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human. We both turned and started going quicker down the mountain after hearing it. I said, "What is that?" And he said he has no idea. I started to hear footsteps from behind us. I said to John to stop again, and then we stopped and listened. You know how it's dead silent during a snowfall? Well, that's why it was so easy to hear footsteps from behind us. It was so foggy and the forest was so thick, however, that it was near impossible to see whoever it could have been. John said that was definitely not the sound of an animal, and no animals would be following us, especially when we're making noise. I suddenly felt a vibrating in my coat pocket. I took out my phone and saw Trish was suddenly blowing up my phone. She must have been trying to reach me, but I didn't have service until now, and all her texts sent at once. As we continued to walk, I took off my gloves so I could answer what she was saying. But as I read her texts, I started to worry. She was asking if that's John and I outside of the cabin, and that they're scared to go out there. I replied the best I could with my wet fingers, "What do you mean?" It didn't deliver. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. I lost reception again. I told John about the text, and said we have to hurry. All the while, we kept hearing humming and moaning sounds not far behind us. We were basically running at this point, all the way down back to the cabin. We finally saw the lights of the cabin through the quickly darkening woods. We got to the cabin and knocked on the door for the girls to let us in. Once inside, the two of them started talking over to each other, trying to explain what happened. Basically, what they told us was that they saw two people walking around outside like 10 minutes ago, one of them stopping by the window and looking in. They were too scared to go over and shut the blinds until we got back, so they stayed hidden in one of the rooms. John went to his dad's room to get a gun. All the blinds were closed now. The problem was we still had to go out for dinner, so John and I went outside after tensions cooled. He brought the gun with us. We looked around quick, then told the girls that it was clear to come to the car. We didn't bother telling the girls about the sounds in the woods because it would just further scare them. We went to a diner, then came right back. We skipped the hot tub tonight and instead had a movie night inside. It was interrupted by a loud and aggressive knock at the door. We all looked at one another, and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. John grabbed the gun off the table, and he came back over to us. Whoever was out there knocked again. John asked if he should threaten to shoot them. I said no, we should just remain quiet. There was never a third set of knocks. The girls went to the bedrooms, while John and I stayed in the living room, waiting in silence for about half an hour. He had the gun loaded, though I know he was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. The two of us opted to sleep in the living room that night so that we would be able to hear anything. We made it through the night. The next morning, we all packed up. I helped John clean up and put everything back into the shed outside. Then we left. But the really weird part was that there were no footprints at all in the snow outside the next day. It's possible that they were filled in by the new snow, but still, it seemed weird. Whatever was going on there that night couldn't have been good.